Okay, so in this lecture, I'm just going to look at Tinder and gender, particularly how they're represented in the modern intimate. But again, to kind of doing a sociological examination of how Tinder is being represented in this story. Okay, so just to give some background, this is kind of like last week, I think, where I gave some background to Facebook kind of being founded on some gender politics in terms of it originating out of Face Mash and its depiction in the Social Network film. So Tinder also has kind of a history that is a little bit, or really problematic actually, where one of its co-founders harassed another one of its co-founders. So on the left of this picture here, there's Justin Mateen, and on the right, there's Whitney Wolfe. So Whitney Wolfe was one of the co-founders of Tinder with Justin Mateen, but she experienced a lot of harassment within the company, um, both on a personal level. So her and Justin dated, and then she broke up with him, and Justin harassed her for extensively. This resulted in a lawsuit where Justin Mateen paid Whitney Wolfe $1 million. So there's obviously kind of a lot of bad behavior. A lot of their texts got leaked. I just have one of those texts on the right, but they're pretty awful. And beyond that, just within the kind of the company politics of Tinder, they wanted to remove Whitney Wolfe as a co-founder because the reasons given were that was she was a girl. She was 24 years old at the time, and they thought that if there was a 24-year-old girl as one of the co-founders, that would reduce the company's credibility. And they actually did kind of remove her as a co-founder from the company. So obviously a lot of kind of bad stuff going on behind the scenes of this kind of app that's all about kind of gender equality, at least in how it allows users to just match with whoever they want. It seems to be kind of a completely free kind of sexual marketplace, but even the background behind the app is problematic. But Whitney Wolfe did go on to found Bumble, which was kind of like the feminist version of Tinder. At least that's how she marketed it. And but there were kind of issues with that, and we kind of got into that last week a little bit. But just to give some kind of further background, so Bumble is kind of marketed as a feminist app. This professor of health science at Western University in Canada, Trina Orchard, she went on Bumble and she wrote an article kind of evaluating its actual kind of uh, feminism. And I'll just read what she says. This is from an excerpt from a kind of a longer article. So she writes, some Bumble men view the app's signature design as a way for women to rob them of their rightful dating power. Many openly critiqued us for acting like men, and I was ghosted, sexually degraded, and subjected to violent language by men who resented me or what I represented as a feminist. This was confirmed by several of my matches who discussed women's acquisition of socioeconomic and sexual power as a problem. These insights not only shocked me, they impaired my ability to have meaningful dating experiences on Bumble. So this was actually something that I saw kind of, I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole on the internet, and there was these kind of uh, men kind of making the argument that Bumble is gender discrimination because it does kind of give the some kind of power to women in that they can kind of pursue men. Um, and maybe it is a kind of a gender discrimination, but that doesn't make mean it that it's like in any way comparable to patriarchy, obviously, or something like that. Sometimes you need a little bit of discrimination to kind of set things equal. But as Orchard kind of reports here, men aren't really having it. Uh, they kind of hold on to, or at least the men that she was interacting with, kind of hold on to the idea that uh, men should kind of be the hunters or the pursuers of women, and any kind of reversal of that kind of takes away their masculinity. So there are some problems with Bumble. Orchard actually concludes kind of weirdly that one of the possible improvements to Bumble would be to render it more kind of equal. So to take away that kind of ability for women to be the one to send the first message, but rather bringing it back and making it Tinder again. So, uh, yeah, so that was kind of one of Orchard's solutions that she kind of arrived at for solving Bumble, which is kind of weird, I think, to go back to regress perhaps to Tinder. But yeah, a lot of people have kind of a positive opinion on it on Tinder, and we definitely saw that in this week's reading from Auguste Brown, the LA Review of Books article. And so this article came out very soon after Tinder just started to emerge onto the scene. So kind of it might just be that kind of like when something's just starting to happen, we have kind of a more optimistic view of it, and as time goes on, we start to see the problems. But this August Brown article I thought was a little bit too positive about Tinder, and especially I was very I didn't understand why he went after Marie Calloway. So saying that if Marie Calloway just had Tinder, she wouldn't have these horrible experiences. I do kind of wish that there was a Marie Calloway Tinder story. I think that would kind of be a kind of a good uh, I don't know, like a good kind of reaction to August Brown's point, but there sadly isn't one. But I am curious what you guys think if Tinder would solve all of Marie Calloway's, at least her character's problems in those stories that we read, or if there's something more serious going on there that an app can't really solve. But just as one of the kind of the positive things that August Brown writes about Tinder, uh, so this sense of constant control crucially makes Tinder a safe and rewarding app for women to use. Close to half the app's users are women, and they behave roughly the same as the men on it. Both genders give out about a 70 to 30 ratio of rejections to acceptances. And yeah, maybe this was how Tinder originally started with this kind of equality that August Brown is pointing to. But for some reason, over time, this declined. So yeah, August Brown liked Tinder. Okay, so excuse my wordplay, but so it went from a Tindertopia to a Tinder disaster. This is just an article. I think it was a 2016 article, and this was kind of just somewhere along the line. This kind of equality that Brown is pointing out started to go wrong for some reason. So in this article, uh, how Tinder feedback loop forces men and women into extreme strategies. They point out that men tend to like a larger proportion of the women they view, but receive only a tiny fraction of matches in return, just 0.6%. Women use the opposite strategy. They are far more selective about who they like, but have a much higher matching rate of about 10%. Just another kind of interesting fact that this article brought up was that men's kind of character count of their opening messages was very low. So their opening messages only averaged 14 characters. 14 characters is not very much. It's pretty much, hey, how are you? Or hey, how's it going? So very kind of simple messages that men were sending women. And the messages that women would send men, by contrast, I think the average was about 120 characters. So a lot more kind of work, I think is a good, or labor, emotional labor to recall the feminists, being put into these kind of dating apps from women than from men. And just to kind of show how kind of that gender equality that Brown pointed to kind of declined. So this was 2016, a few years after Brown's article. So already starting to see a kind of uh, women kind of leaving the platform, I guess, would be the best way to describe what's happening here. And then even further along, so this is today, yeah, still kind of declining. Women are still kind of leaving this app. So obviously, there's something going wrong on this app that, yeah, is worth kind of thinking about. Okay, and then just kind of one final point from that article. So the feedback loop that they're talking about here is kind of the fact that um, men kind of, because they have this low match rate, they kind of respond to that by matching with everyone. So they think that will kind of increase their matches if they just match with everyone. And because men start matching with everyone, then women start being even more selective. So that's the kind of the feedback loop that they're talking about. And I think that they're kind of, this article I think was written in 2016. So it's kind of come true. Uh, in that case, Tinder will effectively be broken. And I just have this TikTok of, yeah, an example of how Tinder can be broken. Okay. So, um, obviously, this kind of goes to show how, like, kind of these gender behaviors can become robotic. They can become machine-like almost, and not even almost. Like, this is kind of, yeah, where masculinity, or at least the masculine pursuit of women, becomes completely mechanical. And it is an example of Tinder becoming broken, I think. Okay, so just some other kind of problems I think with Tinder that other kind of commentators have pointed out. I think it's useful to kind of bring into our analysis of these stories. Um, so yeah, this is kind of from an article by Jenny, or a chapter by Jenny Van Hoof, where she did interviews with a bunch of men that were using Tinder. And yeah, she was just kind of, she mentioned how um, the matching system, where kind of the matches or the likes are kind of the currency of this sexual marketplace. In order to accrue more currency, uh, kind of typical masculine and feminine bodies are obviously valued on a kind of a casual hookup app like Tinder, where, yeah, I think she was kind of pointing out how traditional masculine behavior uh, and or traditional masculine bodies. There's a lot of kind of shirtless pics. I haven't been on Tinder for a very long time, but a lot of shirtless pics and a lot of kind of bikini pics for women. A lot of kind of, yeah, eroticization of the body, eroticization or overemphasis on appearance. Obviously, these kind of market dynamics, they can kind of increase gender stereotypes and if and deprivilege other types of bodies, other types of kind of inhabiting masculinity or inhabiting femininity. This kind of sexual marketplace can kind of just drive gender stereotypes because a lot of us are kind of attracted to the opposite, to kind of stereotypical perhaps images of femininity and masculinity. And this kind of, this next point that Van Hoof makes, I think, is even more tied to the modern intimate. Um, so she writes, technology encourages increased refinement of taste as users aim for a match who is out of their league. While several of the men interviewed had been using the app for a number of years without meeting any women that conform to their ideal, they refuse to compromise as the internet unleashes a fantasy yet inhibits actual romantic feelings. So I think this kind of applies perhaps to both characters of the modern intimate, perhaps more to Eric, who has this kind of, he seems like a very kind of attractive man, a person who would be attractive on Tinder. He probably, I'm assuming, he has a lot of matches. I think it mentions in the story at one point how many matches he has. It's pretty high, even though one of them kind of just leaves him abruptly. Just going to show how this is kind of a fantasy of kind of connection that someone, he gets ghosted pretty much. So it does seem like kind of limitless options for being with another person, which is obviously quite different from what it used to be when we would just encounter people in real life. We had a much kind of more narrow set of options, but perhaps that is kind of better, just from a psychological standpoint. Uh, when you have like hundreds of options to choose from, it becomes almost impossible to make a choice. Whereas when you have a kind of a smaller range of options, you aren't kind of haunted by that idea that there might be something better out there, and that urge for something better kind of haunts these men that Van Hoof interviewed, in that they always have, or Tinder kind of ingrains in them the psychology to always kind of be hunting for a better option. and having kind of a very high standard of what they're looking for. It kind of makes it so that they can never kind of rest or feel good about it about making a choice. The range of choices is just too expansive, and I think this kind of illuminates for me at least the psychology of the character of Eric, and perhaps also Carrie as well. So yeah, this is kind of a shorter video. Just wanted to talk about Tinder a little bit, and yeah, in the next video, I'm just going to look at some of the kind of the more getting into the literary formal features of these two short stories. So I'll see you guys in that video. Bye for now.